Hello and welcome to today's webcast hosted by the Sales Management Association. Our session will start in just a few moments. First, some brief announcements. Please remember that today's session will be recorded and will be made available for playback in the Sales Management Association's resource library. Our members will also be able to download copies of any slides used today in our resource library at salesmanagement.org. Also, we do welcome your questions and comments. We encourage you to submit them at any time during the presentation. You can do that in a couple of ways. You may use the small chat box that is located just below the video display screen on our website. Alternately, you may email your questions directly to us by sending them to support@salesmanagement.org. Your questions will come directly to me, and I'll be happy to read them along with any comments that you have during the Q&A portion of our session today. Our session today is one in a series of web-based Sales Management Association presentations that feature practitioners and thought leaders in the field of Salesforce effectiveness. The Sales Management Association is a professional association for sales operations, sales enablement, and sales leadership professions. We provide our members with research, case studies, training, peer networking, and professional development. If you're joining us for the first time, we encourage you to consider membership in the association and be sure to check out our large resource library online while you're with us today at salesmanagement.org. My name is Bob Kelly. I am Sales Management Association Chairman. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce an esteemed panel who'll be joining us for a discussion about hiring in today's challenging environment. I'd like to briefly introduce each of our three panelists. First, Michael Ahearne. Michael Ahearne is Professor of Marketing at the University of Houston. His research focuses primarily on improving the performance of salespeople and sales organizations. He has published over 50 articles in leading journals throughout the marketing and sales field. And his research has been profiled in Wall Street Journal, Business 2.0, Business Investors Daily, Business Week, Fox News, and many others. Michael is no stranger to our audience. He's a frequent contributor and speaker at our events. Michael, it's always nice to have you with us. Welcome, Michael Ahearne.
Thank you, Bob. Looking forward to talking to everybody today.
Great. We also have with us Nick RIni. Nick is co-founder and chief executive officer at Cyalytics, a software company specializing in experiential learning and predictive analytics. A prolific entrepreneur, Nick has been CEO to two venture-backed companies and an advisor to tech company CEOs. Earlier in his career, he was also EVP of business development at Brand Games and vice president of sales at Citadel McAfee, now Intel. Nick RIni, thank you for being with us and welcome.
Hi, Bob. Thank you very much. It's great to be here, and I look forward to this session.
Terrific. And lastly, Nick's colleague, David Solot, is Senior Vice President and Chief Science Officer at Cyalytics. There he helps guide the development of the firm's learning management system, Digital Chalk, and its Uptick sales simulation system. More on that actually later in our session today. David previously worked at Caliper, where he was Senior Vice President of Client Services and Director of Application Design. David, so glad to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here too, Bob.
Terrific. Well, the topic today is certainly relevant and certainly timely given what's happening. In fact, I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes, if I can, trying to set the stage just a little bit about what is happening in the market today. So here's a quick couple of slides with some charts I managed to pinch from a few economics sources. Let's use these to briefly set the stage, and we'll invite comment from our panelists. The first thing to notice really is that we're in the middle of something that people have enjoyed describing as the Great Resignation. Now, the reason it's called that is because people are quitting jobs faster than they've ever, or not faster, but at a higher rate than ever before. Since this metric has been measured, we've yet to measure as many people quitting. And in fact, that rate is accelerating. Interestingly about this statistic, though, is it coincides with a very high number of job openings. In In fact, if we extrapolate out the number of quits that we would expect, it's actually more or less in line with the very high number of job openings, as this chart suggests. Those openings represent something like 6% of employment this is in the US. Now, what is a little bit more concerning is the rate at which people are transitioning from unemployed to employed in this market. And here we see far fewer people doing that than we would expect. So combined with a high number of quits and a high number of open jobs is this lower number of people transitioning from unemployed to employed. Many potential reasons and causes for this, perhaps those are worth discussing. But before we do, I'd like to introduce something else happening in the labor market, which is it's just changing nature in terms of the representation of various generations. You can see the percentage of people in my category, sort of this Gen X and early boomer phase, are tapering off, making room for these hooligans from generations we call Generation Z and millennials. And, these are people with a whole different set of expectations and assumptions about what they want to get out of work. So what we're left with here is a labor market that is not only heating up, it's also changing in its very nature. And so the question at hand really is, what does this mean for us, um, uh, those of us managing sales organizations? And let me have you weigh in on this first, Nick. What is this crazy labor market, changing labor market mean for those of us trying to recruit salespeople?
Thank you, Bob. There are so many elements, and there's so many different ways to answer that question. And we could probably spend the entire session on that alone. But let me just focus in on one thing, and you'll probably hear me repeat this a couple times, but the audience has dramatically changed. And it hasn't happened just overnight. It's been taking place for about a dozen years or more, where when I got into the workplace, it was all about how I fit into the company. And now people are looking at it as, how does this company fit into my life? And that is a huge shift in how we have to think about hiring people. And it's not just the hooligans, as you mentioned. The hooligans have trained the rest of us to think in these terms as well, and to be a little bit more self-centered as we go into a new role with the company and be more demanding of various things. I think that's probably one of the bigger issues that I've seen.
Yeah, I'll throw it open to you gentlemen. Are there specific things we see in these younger generations?
Bob, if you could go back to that chart that you were just showing again of the generational differences, I'd like to make a comment on that really quickly. One of the really interesting things is this is even pre-pandemic. And when I go out and meet with big business-to-business companies or talk about trends or challenges they're facing, a lot of them would talk about, one of the biggest issues that we have is some of our most important relationships with customers are owned by boomers and people in the Gen X group that are just getting ready to retire. And these relationships, we need to find out how to transition these, and we need to figure out how to actually manage these transitions in a way that we can keep these customers happy and manage the expectations of these teams that we work with. The challenge that they were faced with is many of the younger generations that they were bringing in had different expectations in the way they work, and also even in the way their job fit and job structure is set up, and even the number of hours they work. So for example, oftentimes they'd say things like, I want to come in, but I want a flexible work week. I want to work 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week. I don't want to work weekends. And it's sort of dictating the terms of the way they want to work, rather than thinking about the old school was, how do I best accommodate the customer to their work style, So it became a bit of a challenge for many firms to figure out how to manage this and how to staff their teams to be able to actually manage these relationships effectively. and to hire people that want to meet these expectations that these customers already have built for themselves. So it's really interesting, and I see that as a professor at a university develops sales students that go out in the market and the changing dynamics of the way they expect and what kind of jobs they're looking for that make them think about having an interesting career.
So it's a challenging environment to respond to these needs. It's also one in which workers may be getting a more powerful bargaining position, one that they've in fact not enjoyed for some time. So management is faced with sort of a double-edged or a twofold challenge in responding.
I would just quickly add to that, Bob, that not to reiterate anything that was already said, but the ship has already sailed on that. You know, I remember several years ago hearing conversations about what are we going to do when the balance of power shifts towards the millennials and Generation Z, and how can we be prepared for it? That ship has more than already sailed, and there are fewer and fewer organizations trying to resist that pressure. The majority of organizations now, to Nick's original point, have accepted it and realized that the culture of work has changed, and it is not likely to change back, not for another 2 or 3 generations, if past changes are any indication.
You know, let's talk about some other changes happening. And the next thing I want to talk about is the changing nature of sales jobs themselves. We've seen a lot of new jobs arising, especially during companies' efforts to cope with the pandemic. And it's worth maybe considering how specific kinds of sales jobs and changes in those jobs can affect the way we hire and make hiring decisions. So let's talk about that a bit. In fact, I'll have, if I can, I'd like to have Mike speak to this issue of changing sales job role definition and how that affects hiring.
Yeah, I think one of probably the most interesting thing is for a very long time, probably 20, 30 years, we had heard this concept of what we call disintermediation, which is essentially that for many of these sales jobs, they won't be necessary anymore because there will be a direct relationship between the firm and the customer and not need these sales channels that are out there to be able to facilitate this relationship. And one of the things that we've come to realize probably particularly in the last 5 to 10 years, is that salespeople are in fact instrumental in building these relationships, but there are different roles that salespeople have been taking on, and the types of jobs that they have and the structure of the way they manage those customers across firms has changed the dynamics of those roles or those jobs. So, for example, you're going to have more push in recent years towards certain customers where they just want to be able to make the most efficient and effective purchase possible and not need a salesperson, just eliminating the sales role. So these would just be like salespersons that are out there simply just providing specifications of products, quoting, things of that nature. Those roles are starting to be eliminated. And what we're tending to see is instead of having a general salesperson that's out there in the sales force, we're moving and transitioning, and COVID has expedited this process. And one of the things that we see now is that there's a greater demand for inside sales and the inside sales function. So that we find, for example, there's a number of advantages to inside sales. One, we see that we can cover larger territories and larger geographies with an inside salesperson as technology enhances, and we're able to contact with richer forms of communication virtually. And as a result, many customers are having this preference to be managed, even more valuable customers to be managed by inside sales. So we have both inbound and outbound salespeople and sales staff that are working to be able to manage customer relationships. We still have our traditional account managers that are out there, but that role is shrinking some. And then yet on the other side, we're seeing some more key account or strategic account management positions building. Now, the really interesting thing about this is if we think about how we're looking to hire for these positions and how we screen for them, a lot of firms really haven't thought through what are the requirements or characteristics or abilities that are needed for a person to excel at each of these different types of jobs. How do we screen differentially for an inside salesperson than we do for a key account manager, than for a general outside salesperson in the field? What does it take to make a person effective in these different roles? And how do we think about the capabilities that these individuals need? And one of the things that, in fact, I just want to point one thing out is that I've done a significant amount of work recently with Exactly, which is one of the companies that does a lot of the back end administrative work in the Salesforce compensation side, and they have millions of salespeople in their database. And one of the things that has come up from that, which is really interesting, is that this inside sales, the formal classification of individuals into inside sales functions, has accelerated massively through COVID. So not only are people just selling virtually, but the formal role of being called inside sales has increased by over 75% in the last year and a half. So we really need to think about these jobs differently. We can't think of a sales rep being a general sales rep. There are all different kinds of salespeople, and we're going to need different skills and abilities to fill these jobs.
Yeah, I think you presented that idea with a fair amount of understatement. I mean, weren't we all inside salespeople there after the pandemic? I mean, that was sort of a conscription issue, not necessarily a something companies wanted to do. They were essentially forced to make everyone inside. What's interesting to me is the compounding sort of challenge of having people adapt to these new roles. And it's not just the transition, but also the recovery has been uneven. The shifts in supply and demand have been really abrupt at times. And so I just wonder to what extent, and Mike, you can respond, or Nick or David, to what extent is it also important to sort of recruit for positions that can be adaptable, or that aren't so narrowly defined that they have trouble adapting when these unexpected changes come up?
Well, it wasn't so. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Dave.
It wasn't so long ago that a big conversation was that we have witnessed the death of the job description. This was pre-pandemic. That the job description with a static list of responsibilities was outdated. And the way to define jobs now were based on general competencies and general roles that we needed people to fill. I think that that's accelerated with the pandemic, and the need for flexibility is a lot higher. You're not necessarily hiring to fill a specific job that you have now, but you're doing what was considered a luxury not that long ago. You're hiring to fill your bench and to build up your bench strength of people with sales competencies in many different areas who can fill different roles as the market changes. And I would add to that one of the things that the newer generations are looking for, to reference what we were just talking about, is a company that will invest in their own development in different areas. So it's a pretty convenient merging of, we're seeing the job definition get more diluted. We need people with a broader skill set, but we are also seeing job hunters out there that say, if I don't know how to do this yet, I want you to invest in me and help me learn how to do it. So there is a nice meshing there between what we need as organizations and what is out there in terms of the desire among talent.
Yeah, these seem like opposing ideas. Let me try to bring them together. Namely, we need people who can be adaptable. We have no idea what the future holds, and recent experience has shown us that it can be, we can have real shocks, very difficult to anticipate. On the other hand, there are specific kind of roles where it's a mistake not to try to describe the really salient aspects of those unique roles. So for someone who's dedicated to inside selling, you really have to have someone suited to that role, or who's dedicated to large account management. And I think this is the issue that Mike is bringing up, that companies may overlook the need to both be specific, even in the rush to find good all-around athletes.
You know what's interesting, Bob, is that companies have been experimenting for a little while with the idea of how do we track people in careers in sales, and so, for example, in many other areas of professional areas like engineering, a person comes in and there's a very specific career track that they can follow up to senior management in engineering positions. In sales, oftentimes it's that you become a salesperson and then you would either move to a sales manager or you were stuck in some sort of sales role perpetually. And so then the question would be is, well, how do I track? How do I progress? And oftentimes when people felt like there were stagnant issues, they would job hop because they wanted something more exciting. They want another opportunity. And the companies that have really nailed this are ones that have really thought through what career progressions look like for salespeople, how to reward people with these career progressions, and also how to hire people and determine their capabilities and how they track them within jobs. So, for example, does this person, just because they're good at sales, does it make them a good sales manager? No, not necessarily. Because they're good as an inside salesperson, will they be a good key account manager? Not necessarily. So we have to think about what are these career tracks look like? How do we reward people to build them within organizations? And I think this is a ticket for also being able to be effective at retention as well. Because people now feel like if their job has gotten stagnant, if they're don't moving anywhere, if it's now people just feel like they can job hop. There's no problem with doing that. That's actually a norm now. So firms have to think about what am I gonna do to bring that person to the next step in their career? And that just isn't happening as effectively as it should right now in many organizations.
Great, thank you. Well, let's talk about another issue. I have a feeling some of these are going to be sort of iterative. We'll be coming around on them. But the next issue I want to bring up is how to attract candidates in a market that, as we've described, is increasingly competitive and overheated. So, Nick, I'm going to turn to you on this one. Sure. It seems like a lot of this is going to come down to how we find, attract, and convince people to join our firms as salespeople. How are companies doing that are making progress?
I don't want to bore the audience with how we would necessarily go about identifying prospects, because I think that's a little bit easier with social media and all of the various avenues that we have available to us to do that. I think the real challenge is going back to my opening comment about understanding your audience. I think that is probably one of the most important and underrated aspects of hiring in many cases. And I think it's really important that as hiring sales leaders, we are able to articulate the benefits that our company offers, not vacation time. I'm talking about the social aspects. I learned something recently that's very interesting. There's something called a B Corp. Not a C Corp, not an S Corp, but a B Corp. And a B Corp is a company that is socially responsible and has registered so and been approved so, and then follows a certain thesis, if you will, a social thesis where people can get on board and people can get excited about that. And I know that this is very, touchy-feely, squishy stuff, but I have to tell you, it really is very important to people how the company is perceived. And of course, that's going to change. If you are in the materials handling space, that's going to be, you're looking at a different audience than you are going to be looking at if you are in the tech space. And, education matters. And, there's so many variations, still not the word I'm looking for, so many variables that you want to take into consideration depending on the organization that you're hiring for. But know your audience, know what's important to them. It doesn't take that long to do so. A little bit of research.
So the idea here is that many companies are rethinking the corporate charter. It's not just about profits or shareholder value. It might be about other things. And these purpose-driven things are very appealing, especially to younger workers. So your point, Nick, is that, it's not enough just to talk about economic opportunity. You got to tell the whole story. And, you might not have a story good enough for some workers if you don't have some of these other things like a purpose.
So one of the things that we talk about, for example, when we're looking to hire people, is that we are inclusive. That is really important. And we believe these things, or else we wouldn't tout them. But the other thing is we say that we make risk-taking risk-free. And while it's not a democracy, we invite different opinions and ideas so that we can formulate a direction. Everybody's ideas are welcome, and some of them will be used. But that tends to be really important. I would say that another thing that's very important, especially to the Gen X, Gen Z crowd, is what are you going to do for them? How are you going to invest in them? Mike brought up a great point about career paths, and that is very real and a very important aspect of hiring as well. But it's really important to help them understand what the opportunity is, to your point, well beyond the compensation and economic aspect.
These things sound important, but they don't mean anything if you can't find these recruits. Should companies be looking at new places to find recruits, or beyond the typical advertising online or what have you? Any good ideas here? Any at all, Michael Ahearne?
Well, Bob, I didn't want to necessarily pitch my own selling program, but
just here to see up, Mike. You can hit them out of the park. Go ahead.
Since you're giving me the opportunity, one of the things that some of you may not be aware of now, but it's become a really big thing at universities, is over 130 different universities in the United States now have selling programs. And what that is, and I'll give you an example of our selling program. So we've been around a little over 20 years. We're one of the original ones in the United States. And what it is that students that are coming through the university, could be any major, anywhere in the university, engineering, it could be business, it could be communications, it could be pharmacy. If they want to be able to develop their selling skills and move into a potential selling position, they apply for our sales certificate program. And what that includes is they take a Foundations of Selling class, where they learn the basics of what selling is and what careers in sales are. And then from that, they go, if they want to, they can go into a formal training program in sales and sales management, where they take classes in advanced selling, where they learn selling process. They learn CRM and how to use the CRM tools to prospect and develop leads with customers. They take a class in digital selling, sales management, and key account management. And then these students that come out, we produce about, at our university alone, we produce over 180 students a year that go out in jobs in sales, and they're in very high demand. In fact, these typical students will get anywhere from 3 to 5 job opportunities coming out of their program, and are very sought after. And they know that they want to be in sales. They've had a lot of experience in sales. So it provides us an opportunity to really have relationships with many companies that want to get these students as potential hires for their organization. And these tend to be very hardworking, top students. So I think that's a route that many companies could explore. If you go to maybe Bob would be able to post this, but there's a website called the Sales Education Foundation, and the Sales Education Foundation basically has a list of every sales program in the United States. So if you have one in a region that you wanted to explore, you could look into that. They're all over the United States now.
Yeah, there's another organization too, and by the way, I can speak to I can attest to what Michael said. Finding prospects at the university level is phenomenal. I've been a role play judge. I've seen the talent. We are partaking in that same process ourselves. I'm a big believer. There's another organization that you guys may be familiar with. It's called Vendition. And what they do is they basically bring students in from the university, run them through a 1-week training program, and then they determine, who's a fit and who's not during that week. And then they make those who are a fit available to organizations on a try-by basis for 90 days. And they're basically interns. And what's beautiful about it is, you can find out whether or not these folks are really able to sell. And it's going to cost you a little bit of money, but you don't have all of the typical employment ties using this process. So that's yet another means. There are a few organizations out there that do this. They're San Francisco-based, financial services, tech. They cover a few other areas.
So we've talked a little bit about maybe unconventional places to find candidates. And we've also talked about, making your case to the candidate. Can we talk maybe about a few other ideas about how to kind of improve your win rate once you get in front of a candidate, things that maybe companies will have to think about differently?
Yeah, I'd like to weigh in on that, Bob, because I think that one of the things that has not gotten a lot of attention recently, but in the past, but it's getting more attention now, has to do with the overall candidate experience. Candidate experience had been seen very much as an afterthought for a long time. And I've had lots of conversations with hiring managers and heads of HR that said, well, you're applying for a job with us. This is sort of the classic model is you're applying for a job with us. You need to do what we tell you to do. If we tell you to take a long test, if we tell you to come in for 7 or 8 different interviews on 3 different days, if you really want the job, well, then you're going to jump through the hoops we tell you to jump through. That has changed radically. I can't overstate how radically that has changed in at least the last several years, that kind of an approach to the candidate experience just isn't tolerated anymore by candidates. And as you pointed out, we're in a market right now where candidates have options. They have a lot of different places to go. So on one hand, they're expecting that you are going to make it easier for them to apply to be with your company. You're not going to load them down with burdensome multiple choice tests or long interviews with lots of different people, that you'll have an efficient hiring process that is pleasant to go through and that communicates back to them how well they're doing and where they are in the process. That's one. And the other aspect of it is, as we mentioned before, these are people that want to see that you're going to invest in their own development. So if you have the classic, we make you jump through the hoops model of hiring, you're not going to have a very high win rate with some of the new top talent that's out there, because the new top talent that's out there is going to see your organization as being stuck in the past. And that's not the kind of organization that they want to be with. So in summary, I would say, I think it is time to pay very close attention to the experience your candidates have if you want to increase your win rate of bringing in that top talent that you're able to source.
Have you guys ever heard the old joke, how do you drive a salesperson crazy? Wait. That's it. And so just to drill down on what David said, if you make these sales candidates wait for a decision, they will find another gig. They will. And they will be turned off by your offer or opportunity if you don't get them an offer and get it closed quickly. Move as quickly on them as you would any customer. That's my 2 cents to add to what David said.
Nick, I went through an experience recently where I was going through what a sales candidate would go through as part of an application process. And I had to take a test that was this long, burdensome, rank different statements in different orders. And when I finally got through with it, I looked at the top and it said, that was question 1 of 163. Now, it was real. And if I was applying for a sales job and I had another offer come in, I guarantee you, I would have just flipped that screen off and gone over to deal with the other offer. I wouldn't have given them the time of day with that much work asked of me.
Sure.
Yeah, just the timing issue alone, making quick decisions puts you in a favorable position, especially given how much competition is out there. Let's also talk though about another aspect of making good hiring decisions. This one maybe from the employer side, and how we can improve these decisions. They're often referred to as fit. Figuring out who's a good fit. David, I want to stick with you if I may on this
Sure.
question. How are firms improving their ability to identify fit among candidates?
Sure. Well, when I started in doing assessment and job placement many years ago, we were taught that the fit you were looking for is you were looking for fit with the tasks of the job. You were looking for fit with the manager. And that was the big thing. That was going to be the determinant of whether or not someone would be successful. It's changed. That has changed a lot as well. Fit with the tasks of the job is still very important. But a lot of times what determines whether or not a salesperson is going to be successful is things like fit with the customer. And I'm not talking about specific customers, this particular book of business. I'm talking about what do your customers expect in terms of sales cycle, in terms of timing and degree of follow-up, after sales care. There's a lot of stuff that has to do with how well does the way your sales candidates sell mesh with what the environment and what the customers are asking for. And there's also now fit with culture, which we talked about before. There's a study that's been repeated many, many times in the past that salespeople don't leave jobs because of salary most of the time. The top ranked reason has to do with a misfit with either the manager or with the organization. So things that the culture of the organization stresses in terms of what are your expectations around being persistent? What are your expectations around demonstrating curiosity during a sale? Your expectations around how you negotiate. It's not as easy anymore as, does this someone know how to do the kind of selling that we need done? It's, can they do it with the type of customers we have, the kind of market we have, and will they fit in well with the team that they're going to be working on? And that's a much more complicated question than I think we're used to asking.
Indeed. Well, let's talk about a topic it might be worth spending at least a moment on, which is something, I guess, in the context of talent management that also influences recruiting, and that is how many open headcounts we have and how good the firm is at retaining sales talent. So retention and turnover, of course, would drive your need to recruit. So can we talk a little bit about how that influences the demands that employers have to recruit new salespeople? That is their ability to retain the existing ones. Thoughts on that? I'll open that up a bit if anyone has a thought.
I will really quickly before we even get to that. Just one thing I just wanted to add to what Dave was saying too, is that one of the challenges that we have in sales forces now is that because we are getting people quitting or leaving or retiring in these jobs, there's open sales territories now. And with these open sales territories, there's a strong push by the manager to fill these territories because they're not yielding the type of outcomes that they're expected in the territory. They're not able to make their numbers. So what happens is what we end up seeing is what we call a pick of the litter kind of strategy. So HR gives me 10 candidates. I interview these 10 candidates, and instead of saying, do any of these candidates meet my criteria to fill this position? It's which one of these best meets the criteria, and I'm going to pick one of them because I have to fill this position. And as a result, we end up getting churn from those individuals because they're not a good fit. They're a poor performer, and it's a pick of the litter strategy. So I think that that's a big mistake that many firms are making now. And what happens with that often is that they're not screened effectively at the initial stages to be able to then provide to the manager a quality candidate so that manager can then choose somebody out of those 10 that will fit. So if there was already these fit criteria, already capability criteria that were done pretty well ahead of time, that manager could in fact use that pick of the litter strategy and be okay. But if they're given all weaker talent, then that ends up being a very bad strategy. And that's what results in this big turnover rate. And I just want to bring that up because I think that's one thing that many firms are missing right now.
It helps to explain a phenomenon we see, which is that so much turnover happens in the first few months of employment with a salesperson, in part likely because it's just a bad decision to begin with. So thank you, Michael. Other thoughts about retention, ways to improve that?
Yeah, I think that there are, there's so many things that can be done. One of those has to do with, and this is something that I've seen a few folks work on, and that is the alignment between the rep and the sales leader. Not all sales leaders are going to be able to mentor all reps on everything they need, but some are really strong in certain aspects of the business. Others are stronger at other aspects of the business. And if you have the ability to align people with sales leaders, that is most definitely going to help in terms of longevity of the salesperson. The other thing.
How are ways that companies can do that, Nick?
Well, certainly you have to understand what the capabilities are of not only your salespeople, but your sales leaders. You need to understand what their strengths and weaknesses are, and then line those people up accordingly. Not an easy thing to do. It's very different than what we've been doing. Typically, we just assign people according to a geography or to other aspects that are near and dear to our business. But this is a very interesting way to get basically allow people to develop a relationship that's going to last longer, number one, and then get the salesperson the training that they need.
Interesting stuff. I want to begin to draw us to a close. I also want to take a moment and just remind our audience that you may submit any questions or comments that you have using the small chat window below the video display. It might be helpful if you pop that chat window out. It can be a little bit easier to navigate. You may also email your questions to us directly. It's support@salesmanagement.org. Here's the last prepared question I have for you, and it's it includes some encouragement to maybe get specific for the benefit of our audience around where companies can increase investment in their hiring efforts. I mean, we've talked so much about how the job market will be challenging for employers and the changing nature, which means of hiring, but also of employment, and how that might cause us to rethink things. Let's talk specifically about specific areas companies can invest in or increase investment in to improve their overall result for those companies really interested in competing in this competitive market. Thoughts on this? I'll make this a jump ball, but Micah, you've given us one already, which is pay a visit to your nearest academic sales center and benefit from the great recruiting source that is for so many companies. Other thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a stab at this one, because with focusing on the application process, for my answer here is we need invest in upgrading your application process in general. It's very easy to fall into the pattern of resumes come in, the ones we're not interested in, they go into a black hole. Sales applicants talk. They share information about companies. They share information about your company. And if one person has a bad experience, if they feel like they chucked their resume into a black hole, you're going to find that fewer people are applying in the first place. So upgrade your process, invest more in communicating with the applicants that come across your door, whether or not you're interested in them, and upgrade the tools you use. A lot of the tools that are being used as part of the application process are 50 years old with a fresh coat of paint on them. It's time for a sea change in how we hire salespeople. We need to use modern tools in order to attract the modern salesperson.
Yeah, I would like to just add a couple things. One is, if you think about sales, many deals are lost because of an improper or inadequate discovery process. And I would say that if you look at hiring, going through a discovery process with that individual is very, very important. Understanding the cultural fit, understanding the skill fit, understanding the demeanor fit, if you will. And again, that probably plays into cultural fit. But what I was going to say is that those things, invest in discovery. And, you know, I'm going to kind of piggyback on what you said, Dave, and maybe take a page out of your playbook, Mike, and just mention that, you know, we have developed a product that helps immensely in this area, changes the experience dramatically, and gives you insights that you'd never have as part of that discovery process. And, you know, there are lots of ways to do just that. I think that that's really critical. Invest in the discovery process. One man's opinion.
But Bob, one other thing I'd like to add is one of the ongoing research studies, and we do a lot of studies at our institute, our sales institute at the University of Houston. But one of the studies that's been going on for about a little over a year and a half through one of my colleagues here in my department, Johannes Abel, is to look at companies' hiring processes from the time they engage with a candidate all the way to the hiring time, and then be able to look at a little bit of information about getting feedback from candidates independently on what they thought about the hiring process, but also getting feedback from people who rejected the job and those who didn't finish the entire process to be able to get a diagnostic. So we actually ended up doing that with a couple of our large corporate partners to be able to look at what are some of these criteria or reasons why people drop out of the funnel in this hiring process. And it's really interesting to see when that is. But we have an ongoing research on that topic. If any companies are interested in engaging with us on that and really understanding how to change your sales funnel of actually prospects, I'd be happy to talk to them as well.
Wow.
Yeah, it really does seem to argue for the benefit of viewing this as a buying process on the part of the candidate. So that's great. Well, let's get to some questions. Again, feel free to submit those now, and we'll do our best to get to those. We have a few in the queue. One of the comment, by the way, one of our listeners suggests that they've been using the Sales Center at Ohio University for 11 years, and they find the competition for the talent there fierce. So a good endorsement for that. Here's another question related to something we haven't really talked about, which is rising wages. Questioner asks, when and how should employers raise wages to be more competitive? I guess that's an easy thing to do, though costly. And we're seeing plenty of signs of inflation already, but what do you think, David?
Well, go ahead. Well, it depends on, are we looking at existing, if we're looking at existing employees versus candidates that we're trying to bring in. I think in general, it's always good to, you asked Bob about where you can invest in getting a salary survey done. If you don't know where the median point is for the salespeople that you have in the industry, if you're not sure, then have a salary survey done, find out where the midpoint is, and make sure that your offers are competitive. As I said, most people don't leave a job because of salary. They leave because of quality of life issues, but that changes when salary starts dipping below the midpoint.
I think one of the interesting things is, Bob, is a lot of times the companies will say, well, we lost because of salary. And it ends up not being the case that they lost because of salary. That's a good reason to come up with, because it seems to be not their fault. Like the company wasn't so exciting to work for. The job opportunity wasn't good. The flexibility of the position wasn't there. The person wasn't excited about the mission that they're on for a salesperson, the product that they're selling. So I think that really being able to highlight all the value that that position brings to the candidate beyond simply just the compensation is going to be really important, particularly among some of the younger generations. Our students are looking for an opportunity for growth, but they're also looking for an experience that they'll enjoy. They want to work in a position that they'll like, and they want to work for a company that makes them feel comfortable and welcomed in that position. So I think there's a lot of elements of that. I think this is an old school question, to be honest with you. This is in my generation where people were like, how do I get a little more pay? Younger generations ask that, but that's not the first thing they ask oftentimes. And so I just want to move us away from some of those thought processes.
Good. Okay. Fair enough. Let's try to get at least one more question in, which is, do you recommend specific ways to use existing salespeople in recruiting new ones? For example, through referrals?
Yeah, I actually do. I think that there's an advantage. Keep in mind, not only do we want to attract people to the job, but we want people who are going to stay for some period of time. And, one of the approaches that I tend to take is tell them not only the good news, but the challenging news, so that they know exactly what they're getting into, what the difficulties may be. And I think that sometimes talking with somebody who's been through the process, who's going to be very honest with them, will help take some of their unknown concerns away and potentially validate what you shared. So I think that that's really, really critical.
Good advice. Well, I'll begin to draw us to a close. Before I do, I wanted to ask Nick, you were kind enough to make an offer to our audience. I'd like you to talk about that. And I have a slide I believe you provided us with.
Wow.
Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Sure. What this is, it's called the Cyalytics Sales Performance Predictor, S2P2. Cyalytics Sales Performance Predictor. What we do is we're putting sales candidates in a 3D avatar virtual selling environment to find out whether or not they can sell. And we challenge them in 5 scenarios that are very different, that basically allow us to score their capabilities in various areas. Both Michael and David have had a significant hand in the development of this product and can speak to many other aspects behind the research and the science. But the idea is, at this point in time, you really have no idea whether or not they can sell. And this product is designed to help answer that question.
Good. Great. So as you point out, anyone interested in participating can contact you directly at nick.RIni@Sciolytix.com.
Yeah, I guess I did do a very good job of explaining that basically we're in the process of doing a beta. We would like to invite companies to bring their salespeople in. What you would get is not only some predictions around their capabilities, but a diagnostic on what your existing team looks like, and then a tool that you can use for hiring going forward. And this beta process that I'm describing is free of charge. So we're very interested in speaking with companies about that.
Terrific. Well, thank you for that kind offer. And gentlemen, as we draw to a close, I just want to thank you each for your contributions today, for being generous with your time and also your insights. A great session today. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob.
Also, before we draw to a close, I'll remind our audience that our next Sales Management Association webcast is tomorrow, October 27th. We'll host a session then called Improving Sales Forecasting, the Power of Predictable Revenue. You can learn about this session and many others on the events tab at our site, salesmanagement.org. I'm Bob Kelly, Sales Management Association Chairman. Thanks again for your time and attention today. Goodbye until next time.